So in this video, we're going to talk about the fallout from the Trump verdict. Let me preface what I'm saying, if you don't know me, that I'm a professor who generally talks about the war in Ukraine, and I'm not voting for Trump. I'm also not voting for Biden, and no, I'm not voting for Kennedy. I am a Republican, and so that is bias within my window of how I see the world, but I'm trying here to just show different aspects or different angles of what's going on. So, with that being said, let's begin by saying, well, one more preface, and that is if somehow I haven't caused you to be at least uncomfortable, if not disagree with me, I haven't done my job in trying to cause you to think here. Okay, so with that being said, I'm going to try to examine from all different sides. So here we are. Trump was out yesterday after the verdict saying it was unfair, rigged, etc. You kind of expected that, but I believe that he really believes that, although I don't know that he wouldn't say it if he didn't actually believe it. That is quite possible. Here's Piers Morgan saying, "This is sad, a shameful, and ridiculous day for America to drag a former president who is running for president again through the criminal courts over something so trivial feels a massive overreach and an incredibly divisive and obvious political partisan action." Okay, so he speaks for a lot of people in the way that they're seeing it. Now, that might not be what's going on at all. The other side is going to say, no, 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 everybody's equal under the law, and he did it, and right, okay. So now let's be fair. Trump did give them the club with which to beat them with. So, I mean, if you're going to be fair, you got to say at least that. But a big swath of America feels like Piers said. But there's this amazing amount of Schadenfreude. I hope I pronounced that correctly. This is the emotional experience of pleasure in response to another's misfortune. Just the amazing amount of vitriol that I saw on Twitter it's just unbelievable. At the same time, I'm not sure that, no, let me rephrase that. Not that I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure that if it was reversed and MAGA was having their Schadenfreude moment, they would be just as vitriolic. I remember 1998 when Clinton was going through this, and I remember being somewhat embarrassed about the way that Republicans were handling that then. And it was no less embarrassing about what the Democrats were doing in the first and second Trump impeachment as well. It was just, it says something more about you than it does about them. Okay, it's reckless. This is Biden saying it's reckless, dangerous, and irresponsible for anyone to say that this was rigged just because they don't like the verdict. Now, that statement is entirely true. If it's just because they don't like the verdict, then that's correct. I also would say that if you're saying it because you don't like the verdict of a jury of your peers, he's also correct. Now, the reason that the Republicans think that this is rigged is because they don't think that this particular thing should have gone to trial, and or they don't think that the judge's instructions were fair. And so for those two reasons, those could be reasons that it gets appealed and perhaps overturned. But I'll defend a jury of peers, certainly. So the jury of peers said that he's guilty, and based on the way that this was handled and charged, he's guilty. And I said the same thing with the OJ trial back in 1994. I remember, I have a clear memory, someone saying, well, he's guilty, he should have been in jail or whatever. And okay, I thought he was guilty too, but if a jury of his peers finds that way, I'm going to side with the jury. It's about the stablest system that we have. Okay, now that's the court system writ large. That also includes if there's an appeal and it's overturned in appeals, I'm with that whole system, right? And if it's not overturned in appeals, I'm still with that whole system. So that's where I am in this process. Okay. What awaits Trump if he appeals the New York conviction? This is the headline from Fox News. And then the headline from PBS, Trump convicted on all 34 criminal charges. Pretty fair down the middle. The headline from the BBC, Trump confirms he will appeal. Okay, pretty fair. CNN was a little less fair with the Trump rails against the jury verdict. It's not that he didn't rail, but it's also painting him in a different light. But okay, still fair. Now, this is, I found really interesting. I don't know who Dan Pfeiffer is, but the prevailing narrative is that Trump's conviction won't matter. Okay, so why would they go about doing this during this time? Now, so if he wasn't running for president, and if he was let's roll the clock back 2 years ago, this would have been a very different event in many people's eyes than if it was right now. Doesn't mean he shouldn't. If you do the crime, you do the time. I get that whole thing, but it looks very different in the middle of a presidential campaign run than it does when you're not in that. But okay, the prevailing narrative is that Trump's conviction won't matter. Most voters are locked into their position. I think that's pretty fair. But polls show that there is a swath of voters who are deeply uncomfortable with electing a convicted felon. Here's how to defeat a convict. So that is what Republicans think that Democrats are doing with lawfare. That's the term lawfare, to use the court system in order to take down your political opponent. And so they're using that to defeat Trump at the polls, right? Now, I don't know if that is necessarily the case, and we'll see whether that is. Now, I put out a poll on my channel, and my channel are people who care about the war in Ukraine, and those people also have a less than positive view of Trump. So this is a convenient sample, and that means that it's not a statistically sound sample, but I tried to make it as sound as possible by saying, poll, I'm an American moderate or centrist, not a left-leaning or right-leaning moderate, but true moderate or centrist, and I believe, and now here are your two choices, that Trump's conviction is likely to make moderates not vote for him, or moderates will view it as unfair and political, and they will vote for him. And by about a 3-to-1 margin, it was that Trump's conviction is likely to make moderates not vote for him. If this happens, then the left will have succeeded with using lawfare and convicting him, and that will take him down a few notches and potentially make him lose the election. I'm not sure if my convenient sample, because of who I'm polling to, with people that already are generally not pro-Trump, is going to be sound. I saw this on Twitter, and this is almost, well, this is significantly the opposite. This is Gerdes. He is a professor. I'm trying to remember what business school, but he's an evolutionary behavioral scientist. He's not a conservative. His followers are not conservatives. And so, wow, 83% to 12%. And that's with about 9,300 some odd votes, where mine only had 1.2 thousand votes. So I'm not sure which of these, but this is really interesting. Whatever happens here, if it's this poll or this poll, that can have a significant effect on the election. If you listen to Fox News yesterday, they said Trump just won the election because of this kind of potential backlash. I don't know that moderates, and I'm sure that the left doesn't think that way. Okay, so Team Trump just put out Trump. I was convicted. Democrats want to lock me away. If you can donate just $1. Well, he made $34.8 million, according to the New York Times, yesterday, since yesterday, fundraising because of the verdict. Now, that's not probably the best way to do fundraising, but before you criticize him, Joe Biden's using the same thing. Donald Trump is threatening our democracy. First, he questioned our election system. Then he questioned our judicial system. And now you can stop him. Donate. Okay? It's just amazing to behold. Vlad Vexler actually had a very good thread on Twitter, and I'm not going to read all of this, but when you scroll down to the very bottom of it, he says, the risk is that we end up perpetuating a screaming match in which both sides call each other enemies of democracy. And that's what's going on right now. And if you're doing that, please cease and desist. Don't do that to the other side. I don't care which side you're on. Don't do that to the other side. A better strategy is to relegate my opponent is an enemy of democracy to third or fourth place. Like, put that down the line and talk about something more productive. Put something depolarizing above it. One thing to put above it is a deep commitment to renewing democracy in a way that helps citizens who see each other as enemies. That's where we are in the United States, at least right now, in many ways, share in the values of solidarity and the public good. Okay, and I think that's exactly right. Despite the illusory cheers post-verdict, the bookies will still have Trump as their favorite in November, he concludes with. And I think that's also what it looks like. I mean, if you look at the polling, this is 538, and Trump has been up for some time now. Now, this is a national poll. This national poll doesn't really matter. What really matters is the 6 or so states, which are swing states, their moderates will determine the election. That's what it really amounts to. Okay, here's what you should know about Donald Trump's conviction in the hush money trial. He was convicted on all 34 counts. The big question now is whether Trump could go to prison. The answer is uncertain. The judge set sentencing for July 11th, just days before Republicans are formally set to nominate President Trump for president. Wow. Okay. The charge of falsifying business records is a Class E felony. That's the lowest tier of felony charges in the state. And what they did was convert misdemeanors into a package of felonies in a way that I'm not sure that that can survive an appeal, but that I'm not the legal mind here, but we'll see how that plays out. Maybe it will. The punishment will ultimately be up to the judge. Trump faces the threat of more serious prison time in three other cases that he's facing, but those cases have gotten bogged down by appeals. So he's got other problems, even if he can weather this one. The conviction doesn't bar Trump from continuing his campaign or becoming president, and he can still vote for himself in his home state of Florida as long as he stays out of prison in New York State. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure how that works. If you once you're sentenced, or if so, once you're sentenced, if you go to appeal, then you're not actually there yet, and it can still go on. And so there's a question: can Trump become president even if he's a convicted felon? Yes, he can. He can be elected by the people. That's the bar. In a deeply divided America, it's unclear whether Trump's once unimaginable criminal conviction will have any impact on the election at all. And that's what somebody else was just saying. The guilty verdict was helping unify the Republican Party's disparate factions as GOP officials across the political spectrum rallied behind their embattled presumptive presidential nominee, and his campaign reported a flood of fundraising dollars. So there were some people on Twitter saying, see, now all these people who were saying that they're Reagan Republicans are now going to vote for Trump. I'm not. I don't know why you would say that that's necessarily the case. I do feel that there's some kind of injustice here, but I can't prove it, and I'll leave it to the appeals courts to decide that, because that's above my pay grade. And if there is no appeal, or the appeals courts don't override it, then the jury is the proper place for this to be. Okay, so next. After conviction, Trump says the appeals are ahead. So he can appeal this, and for a number of reasons, perhaps it can be overturned. Maybe it is, maybe it won't be. I just don't know what will happen there. But he can still run, and he can theoretically run and actually win the election and then pardon himself later on, which is a weird thing, but it's possible. There are, as far as jail time goes, there's potentially 4 years for each of the 34 counts. And so he could potentially get 136 years in prison. But of course, nothing like this has been past 20 years in the past. So I can't imagine that that's going to be the case. Bill Kristol said this, replying to Speaker Johnson. Bill Kristol is a very solid Republican. He is a early never Trumper. And you know who Mike Johnson is. Today, Mike Johnson says, is a shameful day in American history. Democrats cheered as they convicted the leader of the opposing party on ridiculous charges predicated on the testimony of a disbarred convicted felon. Now, there's some truth to that. That's not the only part of the story, but there is some truth to that. Bill Kristol replied, the Speaker of the House attacked a jury of American citizens who conscientiously heard the evidence and deliberated in the case. And so while it's a shameful day in history, I do also think that I'm going to side with the jury of peers. Now, if it's overturned because of the way the charges were brought or the instructions or something, I'm siding with that process. Either way, whatever happens, any way that it's cut. So that's where my position is. Okay, and then finally here, this last little bit, this is what it's ultimately going to come down to in the election. This person says, you're either now planning to vote for a convicted felon for president, or you're not. Stop pretending that the side that is not voting for the felon is the crazy one. Okay, so that's going to be the narrative. Trump is a felon. You're going to vote for a felon? Well, the other side is going to say, it's really been unfair because it's unequal justice. Now, while one side is saying that it's everybody's equal under the law, this probably wouldn't happen to somebody else if his name wasn't Trump and he was running for election, is what the other side is going to say. And so the other side should simply say, when is Bill Clinton going to be tried for rape? Now, I'm not kidding about this. This is what the Republicans should be saying to counter that narrative, because we all know Bill Clinton had a really checkered past and nothing was done because nothing had been done historically. And if you're thinking that Bill Clinton is a Boy Scout, he's really not. And yeah, so that's how these two narratives will probably play out throughout the election cycle. Not necessarily about Bill Clinton, but about the uneven application of justice to Trump. That's going to be the counter argument. And so it just comes down to which of those narratives will prevail. This cover will haunt Trump for the rest of his days, says Rick Wilson. I don't know that it will. I think he'll use this to make the argument that the standard of justice meted out against him is an unfair standard, and I think that's the argument that you'll see moving forward. Okay, I hope that I comprehensively explained the different perspectives, and I hope that I was fair to both sides. If I wasn't, please put it in the comments below. I really am trying to just unpack this rather than push people different directions. Thank you for your time, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about what's going on in the United States.